Hey guys, today we're going to be walking through a street side oil change on my 2019 third gen Tacoma. I recently just hit shy of 10,000 miles since the last change, so we're right on track to get this changed out. We have a couple of tools to make the job easier, along with a couple of surprises along the way. So, starting with surprise number one, I found out that one of the bolts to remove the oil filter access panel was stripped. Check out the video on my channel where we address that separately, but for now, let's go ahead and head to the tailgate and we'll stage up all the tools we need for today. Starting with 10 quarts of 0W20 full synthetic oil, the Tacoma is going to eat 6.2 of these 10. We'll need a socket wrench coupled with a 14mm socket for the oil pan bolt, and since we'll be dropping the skid plate here momentarily, I also have a 12 and a 17mm socket. To catch the used oil, I have a 10-quart oil drain pan, also have shop towels, and then a funnel for the refill at the end. Additionally, disposable gloves will come in handy, and one specialty tool that you'll want as well is the oil filter wrench that fits the Tacoma. You might be able to get away with using a standard oil filter wrench, but this one comes with a couple notches along the outside, so I'd highly recommend picking this up. This is a Fumoto drain plug that's designed to keep the drain process simple, clean, and easy by replacing the original drain bolt. I slightly modified this by adding a hose and hose clamp so I can direct the draining oil directly into the pan below. Now, how this works when you're ready to drain the oil is you remove this black retaining clip that's helping hold the silver lever in place. So the spring actuated lever can be turned, which in turn opens the ball valve inside and allows all the oil to drain out. Now, unfortunately for me, amidst my research looking for the most reliable drain valve, I mixed up the part numbers, and we'll see how that turns out a little bit later on here. Another tool in our arsenal today is a MOCW oil filter drain tool. The Tacomas have a relatively unique filter design that requires draining out the oil from the housing prior to changing the filter itself. So the knurled wheel on the bottom here actually is controlling the drain, and you can see it opening right now. And then we'll just go ahead and close that so that all the oil doesn't drain out on us as we're installing this later. I also ordered an OEM replacement oil filter, which comes with a ton of helpful pictures and instructions on the packaging. We'll see what's inside once we get this old one out. So since I'm unable to get this small access plate off, I'll be removing 6 bolts that hold the entire skid plate on and dropping it off of the truck. I've seen a couple recommendations that say that a floor jack can make this a lot easier to lower down, but today I'm just going to be kind of getting under the truck and lowering it down with my knees. I'm starting by loosening up the 2 front and the 2 back bolts holding the skid plate on so that the 2 middle bolts closer to the center of gravity can bear the weight until I'm under there and can lower it down myself. The plate weighs maybe 27 to 30 pounds, so while I wasn't concerned about it hurting me in any form, I didn't want it to rip off any of the bolts or bend itself under its own weight. So here I'm going around and getting each of these bolts out and learned that they're held in with retaining clips, so they're not going to drop out. If they're spinning, they're good. While I'm unscrewing these final 2 middle bolts, I'm supporting the skid plate with my knees so that I don't damage the bolt or the threads in the frame of the truck once it actually starts to drop down. And we are finally free. I kind of shimmy my way out underneath the truck with the skid on my lap and then place it on the tarp below. I figured that the tarp would be a good idea here to protect the skid from collecting more scratches beyond what's already been put into it off-road, and it should also protect the street from any oil drips. Now with that skid removed, let's go get prepped on the top side before heading back under and getting this done. We'll pull our hood latch, crank it to the side, and then we'll open up our oil fill cap, which will allow the draining oil to flow out a bit faster. Real quick, I'm also going to check the current oil level since I'm parked at a little bit of an angle on this street. I just want to make sure that when I go back to fill it up that I'm right around that same level that it's currently reading. So we're looking like we're at that second dot right towards the top of the max fill line, so all good there. Clean that off. We'll target that once we refill. Heading underneath the truck, we're only concerned with 2 specific areas today for this oil change. Inside this cylindrical housing is going to be our oil filter. And then a little bit more towards the back, we're going to find the oil pan drain bolt. I'm unscrewing the lid to my oil drain pan and then also double checking to make sure that the cap on the side that's used to drain it once it's full is tightened down so we don't get any leaks there. Without touching any of the hot engine components, I'm loosening up the oil pan drain bolt here with that 14mm socket. And then once it starts draining, I just kind of make sure that the oil pan is aligned and not splashing oil around. And then just make sure as the flow reduces, I keep that oil pan aligned so we're not spilling oil. I give that oil pan bolt a quick wipe down and we can see that most of the oil is draining out. We've just got a little bit of drip in there behind us. Next up, I'm removing the crush washer, which is just a washer that goes between the bolt head and the oil pan itself that's designed to create a seal when it's tightened and torqued down. I first try to use a plastic trim remover tool to avoid scraping up that oil pan or any of the threads, but it's on there. It's stuck. So I ended up wrapping a screwdriver in a paper towel and just kind of prying it off. So I've still got a little bit of oil dripping out, but I'm going to move forward anyway and try to clean up that area best I can of any dirt so we're not putting any dirt in those threads, which would lead to a potential leak. And I grab my Fumoto drain valve, and this is where I realize that I have the wrong part. So as I'm screwing this in, it only goes about one rotation in before I meet some serious resistance, and I do not want to strip those threads out of this oil pan, which would require basically a replacement of that entire part. So I back it out and look up the part numbers and realize, yep, I ordered the wrong one. Not a huge problem though. I'm not going to be stranded with the truck without oil, so I took the sealing washer off of the drain valve and put it on the bolt which we just removed, and we'll get by with using this without issue. I get that guy tightened down by hand before snugging it with a wrench, and off camera I torque it down to 28 foot-pounds. With that bolt reinstalled, I go ahead and clean the area so that I can later check for leaks. If I see any fresh oil, I know that something is leaking and there's a problem. And on to the oil filter. So more towards the front of the truck here, what we're going to do is take our wrench without any socket and insert it directly into that metal cap. When this comes off, no oil should come out, but this is the location where we're going to drain the filter housing from. I'm just cleaning up some of the dirt and grime off of these threads before I insert in our drain tool. So again, that drain tool, we're going to start out with that knurled wheel at the bottom, completely turned to the left so that the valve at the top is closed. And then we're going to screw the entire thing into the filter housing. A little bit of oil might start leaking out down the tube because that seal isn't perfect, which isn't an issue at all. I go ahead and insert the end of the tube into my oil drain pan and then tighten that wheel to open up the valve at the top, and then we see things start to flow a little bit better. We'll reach a point where it's clear that the oil is no longer flowing and we can remove the entire drain tool. Next up, we have to replace the oil filter by gaining access to the housing. So I'm taking the oil filter wrench and loosening off this entire cap. The last shop I took it to really torqued on that filter housing cover, so I grabbed a bigger wrench and was able to break it free. And unscrewing that final bit by hand, we are met with the filter itself. And I was very surprised to see how dirty this filter was. I'm supposedly right on time with exactly what Toyota recommends, around 10,000 miles, but we go on and pull this filter out just by sliding it out, and then I'll take this over to the tailgate so we can get the new filter installed. We've got our new oil filter kit ready to go, and pulling it out, we're met with a couple of O-rings and a plastic drain tool that accomplishes what we just did in a bit of a messier fashion. So we'll put those to the side, pull out the filter itself, and that is quite the color difference than what we just pulled out of the truck. I'm going to give a quick wipe down of the threads here to get any old grime off. Try to clean out the inside of that the best I can as well. And I'm going to replace the O-ring starting with a larger one first. So there's a little notch that you can fit your nail into and then pull that out. We'll make sure it's all clean. And then I'm going to pull out the second O-ring where the drain cap seals against the housing and make sure we're clean underneath that one as well. So rather than just throwing the new O-rings directly on, what we're going to do is lubricate it with some of that old oil first. What this will do is prevent the O-ring from sticking and becoming pinched as we're screwing these pieces together later, and overall allow for a more reliable seal. The last step is to insert the filter with a little bit of a pop, and we're ready to reinstall this. We got 2 O-rings and a fresh filter ready to go. Back under the truck, I'm cleaning off the threads to the oil housing as well. We've got some old dirt and grime and old O-ring residue left on that metal. We want to get that good seal, so just get that as clean as you possibly can. So we're going to thread the new filter and the housing back on by hand so we're not cross-threading anything. And we'll torque down the housing with the wrench with our special tool to roughly 18 foot-pounds. That tool kind of became stuck, so I gave it a quick whack to get that off. And then I replaced the metal drain cap and just kind of snugged that down to what felt right, since that is just a plastic housing. Similar to the oil pan drain bolt, I gave this entire area a wipe down as well so that we could easily find any leaks. Back up top in the engine bay, I'm also going to clean off the threads of the oil fill cap, get any dirt removed from the housings. And then I took my funnel and began adding oil. One thing I found interesting was that the Tacoma oil capacity is officially 6.2 quarts. However, mine seemed to only need about 5.8. Again, I was parked on a slight slant, so things might be a little bit different for my case, but basically what I'm doing is just targeting that initial oil level that we measured in the beginning so that I know that I didn't under or overfill it. So I let everything settle for about 5 minutes, and then I went over to the oil dipstick and pulled that out and found that we had a perfect reading. Generally, of course, right in the middle would be the absolute best, but I don't mind being a little bit high, especially given the fact that that's where we started out. My final check to make sure that I did everything correct was to start the engine and let it run for a couple of minutes, and crawl underneath and see if we have any leaks. No warnings on the dash is always a good sign. And checking for leaks in both locations, we are looking great. The next day I gave one more check to that dipstick to make sure we're still within range and everything was looking good, so hope this helped you guys out.